While tire and rim width are important considerations on your mountain, road, or gravel bike setup, they're even more important on a fat bike. These large volume tires are often run at pressures in the single digits, where even half of a PSI can make a noticeable difference in handling and grip. For winter riding, where flotation is the primary focus, 4.5 to 5 inch tires on wide 80 to 100 millimeter rims are most riders' ideal combination. When it comes time to ride some dirt, some riders put their fat bikes away, while others swap over to smaller, faster rolling 4-inch tires on slightly narrower rims. My personal favorite size for many years now has been the narrower but much taller 29 Plus setup, which gives me a fast rolling feeling without losing all of the floaty, grippy fun of a fat tire. I had considered this to be the ultimate summer setup for an all-season bike, but I had also seen a few people recommend a quote-unquote narrow fat tire on a plus-sized rim. Fyxation, a bike company and wheel builder based in Wisconsin, recently sent me a set of 46mm wide rims laced to their own hubs that were perfect to try out this narrow fat setup. I've been riding these wheels with some 27.5 by 3.8 inch Maxxis Minions. In this video, I'm going to talk about what I think of this miniature fat setup, so let's get into it. When I decided I wanted to test this wheel and tire combination, I first set out to find an inexpensive wheel set that would work. Just in case I didn't like it. Fat bike hubs with narrower than normal rims aren't exactly a hot commodity, but I soon found myself on the Fyxation site where there are more than just a handful of options. These wheels are all hand-built and trued in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so you get to pick your rim size and width, as well as from a variety of hubs like Hope or DT Swiss or even i9. It's not quite the same process as working with a dedicated custom wheel builder, something that I've done before, but if you generally know what you want, it's a really streamlined and simple process. Fyxation ended up sending me a wheel set with 27.5 Duroc 50 rims laced to their own Blackhawk hubs. I've ridden Durocs on and off for years and found them to be a workhorse type of rim, a tad heavy and without any real innovation, but extremely solid and reliable. I was much more interested in the Blackhawk hubs because nothing can ruin your day faster than a hub blowing up mid-ride. Like the Durocs, there's nothing really flashy about them, with 30 points of engagement from 3 pawls and QR or through-axle compatibility. They're a fairly basic hub, but they come in at a great price point, and I mostly just wanted to know how they'd hold up to some abuse. I'll have a more thorough review of these later this summer after some more miles, but for the price point on some hand-built wheels, Fyxation seems to have really delivered. While you could run this setup in the 26-inch size, I wanted to try it out in the 27.5 flavor. My main reasoning for this was to maintain a larger overall diameter. When mounted up, my setup came out to around 29.3 inches in diameter, which is pretty spot on with your average 29er these days. I'm a big believer in the benefits of a taller tire when it comes to rollover and maintaining momentum, so the 26er seemed like it'd be too small for my tastes. If I was going to be riding a ton of black and double black trails, I might go for it for the extra maneuverability, but it's just not what I'm riding most of the time. For comparison, the 29 Plus wheel set I usually ride in the summer measures in around 30.5 to 31 inches in diameter, while the 27.5 by 4.3 winter setup is just a hair shorter than that. So while still being an inch or so shorter, the 27.5 size still maintains the same ride characteristics I like, while also keeping pedal strikes to a minimum. Anytime you put a wide tire on a comparatively narrow rim, you're going to notice it does a few things to the tire. First off, it tends to round out the edges of the tire, meaning the side knobs, meant for cornering, might act a little different than you're used to. You may have to lean a little farther before they really hook up, but it's not the end of the world, just something to keep in mind. The second thing is that the tire is actually going to be both taller and narrower than if it was on a wider rim. The beads and sidewalls being closer together causes the contact patch to narrow out, and the rest of the tire has no choice but to go up. The height difference isn't all that noticeable, but if for some reason you've got really tight tire clearance, you want to make sure there's enough room for mud or rocks. The width is what you might feel more, as you'll need to use a bit higher pressure to keep the sidewalls from folding on you. In my case, it was about 1 to 2 psi higher than I was expecting or what I would normally ride on that size tire. Yeah, this does mean you've got a slightly narrower contact patch with a tad less float, which at first doesn't sound all that great. In reality though, you're using this on harder surfaces where float isn't the top priority, and the reduced weight of the smaller tire and rim give a livelier ride. The Minion FBF and FBR tires are notoriously narrow to begin with, but on my bike they came in at an extra narrow 3.5 inches wide on these rims. One of the most noticeable things about this setup was how much more playful it made the bike. As much as I love the giant 29 Plus setup, I fully acknowledge it's not the best at situations involving tight turns or when a ton of maneuverability is needed. The mid-fat setup does a much better job at this, partially because the front end feels more responsive to steering input, but it's also because of what it let me change up on the back end of the bike. I ran this wheel set on my RSD Mayer V5, a bike I've had for several years now and that I absolutely love. One thing I've never been able to do with this bike though is run the rear chainstays slammed all the way forward, bringing the chainstays down to 435 millimeters. Every other tire and wheel combination I've used has been too tall, but the 27.5 mid-fat had plenty of room in the shortest position. This made a bigger difference in the bike's handling than anything else. The rear end was easy to move around, the front was easier to lift up and over obstacles, and the bike handled a lot like something you'd take to the bike park. The handling was so different, in fact, that I ended up lengthening it back out 6 or 7 millimeters because unless it was a rocky technical section, I didn't like how it rode. The longer chainstay made the bike a better all-rounder that climbed steep double track as well as it handled techie descents. I did notice the change in rollover a bit as the bike would hang up a little more on square edges and small holes, but that's only when compared to the extra tall 29 Plus setup. If you're coming from a regular 29er, especially a hardtail, I don't think you'll even notice. The final point I'll make on the ride is about traction, float, and rolling resistance. One of the main reasons for a summer wheel set for a fat bike is to reduce the amount of float and improve how well the tire rolls. That said, if you enjoy riding a fat bike, you're probably not wanting to get rid of all of that traction and float, and therefore probably want to go with a Plus tire. I found these rolled a bit slower than 29 Plus, but it was close enough that the tread pattern and tire casing differences were most likely the biggest factor there. They also weren't as floaty as normal fat bike tires, or even a 4-inch tire on 65 or 80 millimeter rims. Compared to the 29 Plus though, they did float through sand, deep gravel, and chunky rock gardens noticeably better. Overall, this Plus and fat combination did a great job of balancing the float and traction of a fat tire with the handling of a regular size setup. Compared to 29 Plus, it feels more playful and agile, while floating through soft situations just as well, if not better. In many ways, it reminds me of how 26 by 4-inch tires ride on standard fat bike rims, but with the added benefit of being a bit taller and a little bit lighter. If you're someone who wants to ride your fat bike year-round, but with a lighter weight setup, I think it's a great option, especially if you or your bike don't get along with 29 Plus. And while I won't go as far as saying it's dethroned 29 Plus as my all-time favorite size, it definitely comes in a close second. I want to say thanks to Fyxation for sending this wheel set out. As I mentioned, I'll be doing a full review of them over the next couple of months, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see that video or any more of my content. If you want to support me, consider buying some stickers from my site down in the description, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you think about this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.